I remember the first time I laughed after she died, I felt guilty. I didn't listen to music. I was so committed to being in my grief because I thought that was the way to love her.
Melissa Dlugolecki is a business coach, and she has an experience that is a unique one, a hard one, and it's even resulted in her realizing that people treat her differently when they find out her story as opposed to just knowing her as she is now. And Melissa lost her daughter in a medical case after about 4 months of age. And at that time, Melissa really committed to a deeper understanding of how our mind and bodies function optimally. Because coming out of that experience, you change, your life changes. And there is that period where nothing seems to make sense. And you need to do some things in order to have your life make sense again.
My mission is really to empower people into their possibility. No matter what they're going through, no matter what they're navigating, my life looks wildly different than it did 10 years ago.
Maybe before we jump into the actual experience that you've had, it might be helpful for people to understand this condition and disease that your daughter had. Necrotizing enterocolitis is not necessarily a common word that everybody talks about around the dinner table. So tell us about NEC or necrotizing enterocolitis and just the disease itself so that people can understand more of the context then of what your experience was.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, necrotizing enterocolitis, often called NEC, NEC, all capitalized, is a severely under talked about, but actually quite common disease. It's typical for infants that are born premature. That's where it's not typical, but that's where it mostly surfaces. The research around it has changed significantly since 10 years ago when my daughter had it. Now, she was diagnosed when I was pregnant with a heart condition, the same one I have. I have a scar here. I had open heart surgery. But I went on to play Division I college athletics and run many marathons, and it was considered a very simple repair. So my daughter was actually treated for a cardiac condition. We went in, it was actually March 22nd, so tomorrow will be 10 years. We went in for her planned scheduled surgery. Now she had been born, observed, we went home, but she wasn't growing and she was refusing her food. And the doctors just chalked it up to the cardiac condition. The morning she went in to have her full heart repair, they observed blood in her stool and decided not to do the full repair. And because of a possible necrotizing enterocolitis. Now, it's a really long story to be as concise as I can. They put a PA band on her heart to basically constrict blood flow, like a rubber band type thing. And we were supposed to go home. Now, that was in March, and I left the hospital towards the end of June of that year without my daughter. What happened was she did go in for the full repair in May, but she had undiagnosed necrotizing enterocolitis. And so what happened is when the oxygen, when she was on basically the life support machine while she was having surgery, her intestines were really weak already. And necrotizing enterocolitis is essentially when your intestines dissolve. And she lived for about another month after that surgery, but it was on what was called an ECMO machine, which is basically life support. She came off of that and lived, and then she went on dialysis. But towards the end of June, the medical team concluded that she had no chance of living and that she was beginning to suffer. She had 4 surgeries at this point, and her first diagnosis of necrotizing enterocolitis was actually on her death certificate. After Layden died, I had a big fear of ruining things because I really questioned if I ruined it and I was at fault for my daughter dying. And all of these things were actually showing up in my business. So truthfully, I used to be a mindset coach, but I have found that I can take people so much further by coaching them in their business.
Well, and sometimes that's the entry point, right? And I even think of many of the parents that I worked with in the hospital where they might have been very much in the shoes that you were at earlier, where they never wanted to be in that place. They never had wanted or seen themselves having to go through that with their child. And then they have to. And that's along the same lines of our business or any other aspect of our life where we hit a wall and this is as far as I can go with who I am right now.
Sure.
And if I'm going to go past this, it's going to require a different version of me. It's going to require new skills, new tools. It's going to require me to make some changes. And if I don't, then I just stay here.
I realized that I wanted to shine my daughter's light, and I couldn't fully shine it if I was holding it in, afraid to be too much. So that was the next level. I started my own podcast. I started writing more and speaking more, and I began mindset coaching, particularly for a lot of people going through grief. And so it really called me forward to begin taking care of myself, again, all to shine Layden's light. Yeah. I often say she saved me.
It's a very common phrase that I hear people say who have some element of shared experience with you, is that this experience, awful, horrendous, never would have asked for it, and it also saved me.
Yeah. Felt a lot of guilt saying that for a while. It's been 10 years now. There's been a lot of time. And I say, I don't believe time actually heals, but I think time gives us the space to choose into healing and to do the work. But I really have come to believe that whether or not it was supposed to be that way by design, I don't know, but that I'm on a completely different path in my entire life than I ever would have been otherwise. And that allows me to keep going, because if Layden's life being lost is a catalyst for where I'm going to go as far as I can.
Let's go into this relationship and what you learned about the relationship between grief, love, and suffering.
The first thing is I believe that I understood what self-love was in a way that I hadn't. It wasn't spa days. It could be, sure. That wasn't like the root, the depth of it. And what was interesting was that so often when we're in pain, we actually reach for things that can compound the pain, right? So foods or drinks or distractions. But I said it's like when you're operating at 10%, you actually need to amplify how you fuel and take care of yourself, like more sleep. I started getting into juicing and holistic health and healing. I began studying gut health, actually healed my gut. I haven't taken medication since 2016, whereas I used to carry Tums in my pocket. So it really started with a lot of self-love and giving myself permission to ask for help and support, putting up boundaries from when I needed time off, time away, giving myself permission to just sleep all day when I needed to, giving myself permission to speak about it and be okay if other people were uncomfortable, trust that they could source the tools and set their boundaries as they needed to. So self-love was a huge component of it. I think love for others began in many different ways, but even understanding that my grief counselor really helped me into is understanding grief teammates. To be a true listener, you actually aren't fixing. You're listening and you're letting someone go, and you're not giving unsolicited advice or saying it will get better when, or at least. You're letting the person be. Understanding that my brothers were showing their love through being what was called a distractor. Let's go out to dinner. Let's go here. Let's go for a walk, making me laugh, because I needed to be distracted from my grief sometimes. And then the other was particularly my partnership. I think our society just has gender roles and norms around grief where the male is supposed to take care of the female. And so I had to really get clear. His way of grieving and navigating it was like going into the woods, going for hikes, being alone. He didn't want to be around Layden's things, and he had a daughter from his previous marriage, so going to spend time with her. So his healing left me alone, and all I wanted in my healing was to be with him and to be around Layden's things and to talk about her. So it was incredibly painful to not point fingers or ultimatums or be like, why aren't you doing this for me? And to be like, okay, my way of loving you through the most painful thing we've been through is to let you grieve the way you want. And you grieving the way you want actually feels like a knife is in my stomach. So I think my grief just really created this whole new level of radical responsibility. And I look back and I could cry thinking about the versions of me and how much pain I was in. I was so lost. I think this is important. I didn't want to move on because I thought if I moved on, Layden didn't matter. People would think I didn't care. When someone passes away, like your whole world is like that circle. And your grief fills the whole thing. So Layden, my daughter, filled this whole circle. She said, as you move on, it's still the same size. You just build your world, you expand it. So the percentage that it takes up is less. And I think that's something that gave me a concept that I then gave myself permission, because I wasn't giving myself permission to move forward because I didn't want to laugh. Like, I remember the first time I laughed after she died, I felt guilty. I didn't listen to music. I was so committed to being in my grief. But I think there is this part in our grief journeys where we have to give ourselves permission to move forward without knowing it's not moving on and it's not betraying. And in fact, when we really take care of ourselves, I'm able, like me being able to speak here is honoring my daughter a lot more than if I were too committed to my grief to move forward. I really hope to be a voice that expands our definition and understanding of grief. Because I think when we understand it more and we talk about it more, it has less power over us.